Now we're at Evolve, we're around 40 individuals, and we have unlimited PTO, right? We want people to really lean into their personal lives and spend time with friends and family, and that's part of the culture that we're trying to create. However, we have really high expectations around what they're going to deliver on the professional side. So if you can get your work done, you manage your own schedule, right? We're not going to, you want to do a yoga class in the middle of the day, go for it. Good for you. So I am not into micromanaging people. I want to bring people onto my team who have the ability to manage their own time. But I think people need to listen to their bodies, because I think our bodies tell us a lot. So if you're getting headaches or you've got aches and pains, yes, go to a doctor, but so much of our stress manifests itself in our bodies. And I think we have to listen to our bodies and give ourselves a chance to take a break.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart Hustle Podcast. Today's going to be an amazing conversation where we're talking to an incredible leader across this digital table with me. Today, we're sitting down with Amy, who is the CEO and founder of Evolve Giving Group. Amy, welcome to the show. Super excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So to kind of level set, we're going to talk about a couple of things today. We're going to talk about your journey, specifically when it comes to nonprofit consulting. I would say trading in our 9 to 5 for a 24/7 365, building a leadership team, specifically when it comes to supporting women in your organization. We're going to talk about what your team looks like a little bit later.
Yeah.
But we're also going to talk about risk taking, learning from failure, work-life balance, and so much more. But before we kind of get into that, I want to level set everybody with how you got started on this journey. Now, you went to grad school for nonprofit administration and management with a secret hope that you were going to get your master's degree and then go back into direct services as a social worker.
That's right.
What happened?
Yeah, I guess the joke was on me. I thought that I was going to, play the system and utilize this grant to go back into direct service, because I always imagined myself sort of on the other side of the desk, really working with people directly. My field placement in graduate school was in a foster care agency. I worked in early childhood as a college student. So I really saw myself delivering services. And my experience within this program really helped me develop an appreciation for the administrative side of the nonprofit world. And so I owed 3 years to any Jewish federation in the country as part of this grant program. And I came back to Chicago, which was my hometown. And I worked at the federation in Chicago, and I just sort of fell in love with fundraising. So again, the joke was on me. They really got exactly what they had planned to get out of this investment in me as a young person. And I appreciated the ability to apply that skill set, that social work skill set, in developing relationships with stakeholders of the organizations that I worked with.
I think it's so beautiful. I've noticed a pattern here. I've had a lot of different leaders come onto the show who are amazing leaders and CEOs now. Guess where they all came back, or what their history was? 99% of them were social workers.
Isn't that interesting?
It's interesting. I asked one of my guests about that, and I said, why do you think social workers were able to make the transition to leadership? And my last guest on the podcast said, we're able to make the transition of meeting people where they are. If it's a fundraiser, a community partner, a client, a team member, that's what we do. And I feel like this is a super skill set that I've been able to kind of identify through having so many conversations with leaders who started out in that social work space.
Yeah, or start out in any space. I happen to have two young adult children. I've got one in college and one that just graduated, and we're so obsessed with what is our major, right? What are we going to do right out of college? And I've got one studying music who's a vocal major, and another who's a psychology major. But the lesson that I have learned is that it's not about what you studied, right, or where you came from. Like, get that good broad liberal arts education, but you never know what you're going to be doing 20 years from now. Stop thinking so much about the major and think about what brings you joy. What are you passionate about? What issues energize you? And I wish more young people got that message That it's not, you don't need to define yourselves as 20-year-olds, right? There's a lot that life is going to put in front of you that may change the way you see yourself and what you want to do with your life.
I mean, this is a perfect example of me. I was a sociology and communications major, right? I always thought I was going to go into broadcasting or journalism or something like that. And then one day, after I left a summer job, an opportunity plopped into my lap where I became an entrepreneur in the healthcare space. And all of the things that I learned in the past, I had to take little nuggets from, but they didn't exactly prepare me to meet with the CEO of an organization or a nonprofit or XYZ through that learning lesson.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. Never know.
Don't you think we put a lot of pressure on kids, though, when they come through the education process, right? You're a high school student, you're 17, 18 years old. You graduate from high school. You're asked to make some of the biggest choices of your life, AKA take on debt to pursue a major and pick a career path. But yet just 1 month before these kids came to college, on average, they were having to raise their hand to go to the bathroom. Doesn't that seem like an interesting dichotomy?
What's wrong with us? You're
right.
You're right. You're right. I mean, and so there's so many different paths. There's so much pressure. And again, what you love, what you're doing right now, go for it. Pursue what makes you happy, because you never know where that path is going to lead you. You and I are both great examples of that.
So here, let's kind of get back on track a little bit here. So we're now going through our process, right? We've got our masters. We're now going through the process of doing everything else that we're talking about. You have a phone call that starts coming in from some smaller nonprofit organizations who are looking for advice on how to do fundraising, how to do XYZ. And then you have a conversation with your business partner where you say, I think that there's a business here. What was that conversation like? Or what was that aha moment like?
Yeah. I mean, this was probably my fourth or fifth job in fundraising. And you have to remember that I was at this point a young mother, which really impacts, your everything. I mean, being a parent and thinking about how you want to show up in the world and use your time and focus your time and energy. And so when we started getting phone calls asking if we knew anyone who could write grant proposals, or we knew anybody who could help with a capital campaign or help with an event, and we kept referring those, sure, I know someone, call this person, right? And at some point it occurred to me, I mean, we're all looking for, but I think especially as a young parent, you're looking for that flexibility. You're looking to be able to do it all. I want my cake and I want to be able to eat it too. And so this idea sort of popped into my head. What if we stopped referring all those projects out? And what if we took them, right? There seems like there might be a business there, because what did exist and still exists in the nonprofit consulting space are the firms that work with very large nonprofits. So the hospitals, the universities, the museums, big budgets, what we call large or extra large in the nonprofit sector. And what seemed to be missing to me were firms that would not only support, but really welcomed a partnership with small to mid-sized nonprofits. And that's where we got our start. So almost right off the bat, before we gave notice at our current place of employment, we had 4 projects where we walked out the door and we sort of had a business. Ironically, that was 2008. So it seemed like that the first big economic downturn of recent memory. It should have been a terrible time to start a business. But I think what was happening, and we weren't aware of it at the time, is nonprofits were laying off some of their full-time people. And so they needed external support. That's where we showed up.
I think about what it was like in 2008 when everything seems to be falling, right? I lived in Metro Detroit at the time, and I just remember everybody's house going for sale. Everybody was talking about not having the money, can't go on vacation, XYZ. But it seemed like you kind of really leaned into the founder's mindset in this opportunity of saying, hey, we're seeing all these opportunities. Let's start up our own org to be able to take care of, and I would say harvest on some of the opportunities that are coming our way. What were some of the conversations like with your business partner back then? Because that seems like a time of instability, often not when people choose to go all in on starting a new business.
Right. I think we were just responding to a sense of the market at that very moment, the incoming calls, the requests for help, sort of noticing what was going on in this space. I'll also say there was a lot of naivete on our part. We had no idea what it would be like to found a for-profit business. We both only worked in the nonprofit space. So but I almost think that naivete worked to our advantage, right? There was nothing, we didn't know enough to be afraid. And we really just sort of went into it with eyes wide open and wanting to learn and absorbing the wisdom and the advice of people around us.
I think that that is so important for us to kind of double click on that naivete of somebody who's starting a business. You know, often we hear that your brain is very good at coming up with all the reasons why we will fail.
Yeah.
Right. If I say, how am I going to not do well? It's like, we're not going to get customers. We're going to have an outage on technology. We're not going to be able to meet people. Travel's going to be tough. We're not going to be able to find babysitters, XYZ. But when we have that naivete, it gives us the opportunity to kind of start with a fresh slate. And that naivete is often the superpower of that original founder who said, we just didn't know what could have gone wrong, and we just rolled the dice anyway.
Yeah, I think about all the things that I talk about with my senior team on a weekly basis now. Utilization, right? Staff utilization, HR issues and policies. I mean, none of that was on my mind. If you had told me that was part of the job, I probably would never have done this, right? Because I had no concept of that. And again, I think that ignorance is bliss sort of thing. It just, I think that worked in our favor, where we were just willing to start from the ground up and learn everything we needed to know.
What was your previous role in the organization that you were at before you accumulated the 4 customers and made the jump to the?
I was the director of development and communications. So I had been working in fundraising in every job out of graduate school, some for local organizations, and one national, international organization. So I worked for a very large nonprofit, and I worked for some local community nonprofits. And it was kind of fun to go back and forth to learn both sets of shops and experiences. So at that point, I was working on a capital and endowment and annual fundraising campaign, all of these different kinds of projects for an independent school in Chicago.
Okay. So we make the transition, right? Now we're CEO and founder of this new organization. Were there any type of like mindset lessons, or I would say leadership lessons, that you had to unlearn when it came to building your own team to execute on your vision?
Yeah. I mean, I think as a director of development, you feel total responsibility for, at least for my team, for my department. Like, I needed to know everything, right? I had to be good at grant writing. I had to understand government funding and government grants. I needed to know how to do events. I needed to know how to do capital campaign. I self-educated around plan giving and endowment. It sort of felt like I had to be a Jill of all trades. And I think walking into this for-profit space, but serving exclusively nonprofit. So I knew a lot about what my clients were facing. I knew nothing about putting together a for-profit budget and how that differed from the kinds of budgets that I had written at organizations that I had worked with. I knew nothing about HR. There's just, the list goes on and on. And so what that forces you to do is really take advantage of the resources in your network. So I had a friend who was an attorney, and I turned to him to say, okay, what do I need to know about establishing this? We talked to people about HR practices. We initially started hiring contractors versus employees. So what does that mean? Less risk. And we still do that today. We have contractors on our team. So I think it really teaches you the importance of delegation, collaboration, interdependence. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You don't have to know a lot about everything, but you need to know how to go out and find those things. And you need to sort of keep your ego in check.
We often find, when we're founders of an organization, right, we often have the "this is my baby" fallacy, where it's like, I have to do everything. And if you've ever heard the saying, you can go fast alone or go far together, you have to be able to bring the team together. I actually had a conversation with an employee yesterday. We just did her annual review, and she's been with our team for about, I would say, 3 years now. And our conversation was very interesting. I said, what did you think about the last year in which we spent together? She said, honestly, this has been the most fulfilling year of my work career. And I said, why is that? She said, because you've started to put so much trust into me to execute on the vision and giving me control over the things that I have control over. And she's like, I know you weren't doing that. I'm not saying you weren't doing that before, but over the last year, you've really leaned into me. And this has been a huge learning lesson for me as a leader. If we want our team members to feel fulfilled from the work that they do, we have to trust them. And that means delegating the mindset of saying, I could do it better than this person, and allowing for our team members to step up, which is a huge maturity lesson for me.
I couldn't agree more. And I think about my senior leadership team now. I couldn't do any of their jobs. Right? They know things. They know how to do things better. I joke with my, our vice president of finance and operations all the time. If she left me, I would be in really big trouble because I don't know how to do 90% of the things that she does. But it is about trust and delegation and collaboration. And she's taught me a lot. So just remembering that we have a lot to learn from the people around us, and we are only as good as our teams.
When it comes to building a team, we have the opportunity to be very strategic, not only in the talent that we bring in, but what our team also represents. In our previous conversation, I'm not going to get these statistics right off the top of my head. You said like 74%, I believe, of employees are in nonprofits are female, but only 45 of leadership.
75, 45.
Okay, 75, 45.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Why is that? And how are you kind of zigging against that zag that is such a normative?
I mean, if I knew why that happened, I would be in a much better place. But I have suspicions of why that happens. Again, I think that I think that this is changing, but the nonprofit sector really does pull from that social work, or did for a very long time, pulled heavily from the social work sector. And if you look at those social work graduate school classes, they're predominantly female. So these helping professions tend to attract females, which, by the way, is not a bad thing. I think we're exceptionally good at that work. But what concerns me is that as we rise through the ranks, why are we not making it to the top position? So we look at, that 8% of the top nonprofits in this country are run by women. And the statistic is much lower. I think it's 1% if we look at women of color. So, and we also find that when you look at boards of director, nonprofit boards that are 1/3 to 1/2 women, they're much more likely to hire a female CEO. So we are fighting against sort of years of the myth that says we can't have it all, right? We can't, women's, childbearing years interrupt their ability to excel into management roles. They are not mentored and courted and trained as managers. One of the things that we do with a lot of intention, both internally for our own team and externally for women who work in the field, is offer that mentoring and support, one-on-one coaching, one-on-one mentoring, matching people with mentors in the field. We offer free webinars. Last year, we did a webinar with 3 female CEOs in the Chicago area who moved up through the ranks, because we want other women to get a sense of their paths. And how did that happen for you? What experiences did you expose yourself to? What other roles did you have? How did you work with your board of directors? How did you create a sense of confidence in your ability? So I love the opportunity to do that, again, both within my team and for women in the field, because I think we need to see more women showing up in leadership positions. I'll also say this, the changes that are being made at the state level in terms of salary transparency and making it inappropriate to ask not just women, but anybody what they're making at their last job, really helps create an equal playing field for everyone who's applying. So I think some of the changes and some of the new rules and regulations being made on a statewide level will help women, so that we don't apply for a job and for you it's $25,000 less, right? And for this white male, the salary range looks very different. I had a client, one of the things that my team does is executive recruiting, executive search, in addition to fundraising, strategic planning, board development. And one of our clients said to us about one of our candidates, why does she need to make that much money? What does her husband do? I mean, so that's that's still a question. Yeah. Real
Oh,
life question,
okay.
recent question that we got. I mean, that's the mentality that we're still working with in the nonprofit space, and I suspect in the for-profit space as well.
It's interesting to me that I was listening to a conversation about pay transparency yesterday, and the whole thing was the stories that we've been telling ourselves as business owners, where we can't be transparent about pay. But the example that this keynote speaker was giving was, have we ever looked at the structure of a large public organization? Publicly traded organizations are incredibly transparent about all the dollars that they spend, including bonuses that they give to team members. Is it a story that I would say less sophisticated or smaller business owners tell themselves, where we can't be transparent about the numbers of our business and how much we're paying people? It seems like the data is clear on the wall, but we keep running in this fantasy world where we can't talk about these things because they're taboo. It's really interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think that's especially true in the nonprofit world because we have so many people who are underpaid, and therefore feel undervalued. So if you've got people who are making less than 100,000 in senior leadership roles in your mid-sized nonprofit, and yet Amy's team at Evolve comes in and says you really need to pay 150 for a top-notch development director, it's very hard for you to be transparent about that because your other directors are going to see that, right? So the problem is then we have to right size the whole ship, and that's something that is very difficult to take on. So I feel for these hiring managers. On the other hand, we need to bring nonprofit employees, period, teachers, administrators, service delivery, clinicians up to livable wages based on their years of experience.
I want to rewind a little bit, because when we were talking about, building a team, leadership team of women, I think about the multiplicative effects on the next generation. And I want to kind of ground this in a personal story. Co-founder in my business is actually my younger sister. She's 31 years old and she loves business. Over the last year, she's just become so engrossed and so infatuated with all the things that we do in our business and how she can create a business that she can own. A couple weeks ago, she went to a all women's business leader conference in New York City. She came back from the conference so jacked up about what she wants to do with the future, because she said, Keenan, for the first time, I was in a room full of other women who understand the challenges of being a woman and building a business. And not to say anything negative, but the energy was just completely different
Totally
in the
different.
room than
Yeah.
what it was. And I
Yeah.
think about just like small examples of like what you're building are multiplicative into the future, about inspiring the next generation of great female leaders to come into these spaces and take their industries by the bulls, or by the horns, horns of the bull, whatever that saying is. I can't speak right now.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, I don't know if your sister felt like there were some potential mentors in the room, but I think that modeling and mentorship is so rare. And again, I can speak most knowledgeably from the nonprofit perspective. But again, I had, of all the positions I had before I started consulting, I had dual reporting to one female my entire career. Most of my bosses were men, and some of them were exceptional. Some of them were not, by the way. But some of them were exceptional. The problem is I couldn't see myself in those men. Like, in other words, I couldn't imagine my path to the top. And so what we need as females in this space, in the nonprofit space and in the corporate space as well, is we need mentors and modeling. And I'm so happy that your sister got excited about what she saw, because that's how it should be, is that we should be taking each other under our wings and say, this is how I did it. I love when people call me up, younger women who say, I'm thinking of going out on my own. Tell me how you did it. It's the most fun conversation that I can have.
What do we tell them when it comes to going out on their own? Because it's a scary process. Do you give them any type of like mindset reinforcement, or like preparing them for the unstable road that they're going to be on for a while?
Yeah, I do. And I think we typically talk a lot about failure as a positive. In other words, there's just no chance you're going to start your own business or do your own thing and not face some major bumps in the road, some of which are going to feel pretty catastrophic. It's funny, if you ask me about my successes over the past, almost 20 years that I've been consulting at this point, I have to think for a minute about them. But if you ask me about my failures, I'd come up with like five right off the top of my head because that sticks with you, right? The things you feel like the wrong turns you made, really like don't leave the brain. And so, but I also can point to those same failures or risks I took that didn't pay off and say, well, here's what I learned from them. So what I tell young women is go for, if you can, right? Not everybody is prepared to go for it. You need to be able to take on that financial risk. I was lucky in that I was able to do that at the time. Not everybody can. But if you can take on that risk and you can sort of lean into what you love and what you know and the relationships and the networks that you have built and really draw on those to start your own business, you absolutely should. But expect the failures, welcome the failures, and be open to learning from them.
You can become a really powerful individual when you lean into trying to fail, because failing is a prerequisite to success. I actually went through a little bit of a diabolical phase where in one of my notebooks that I have around here, I would hop onto my sales calls and say, how many failures did I have this week? No's, and I would tally them up. And what I found was the more failures that I had, the more business opportunities came, because I was looking at the number of no's that I got ahead of the yeses. And I was like, okay, only 3 more no's and I can get a yes. It was a weird way of gamifying failure, because we often think that our journey is going to be, it's going to be kind of unblemished, if you will. But the people who are willing to fail the most are the people who are more successful on the longer time horizon.
Yeah. I'm still working on, if I think about the things that I'm really consciously still working on, one of them is recovering from failures. Even just from a day-to-day process, like we bid on a big fundraising project and we don't get it, right? I'm thinking about that for like the next 48 hours straight, which is not so healthy. I don't recommend that. But I'm working on recovering from that. And part of that is I think we put ourselves, like I have a team of really passionate, invested folks. So any proposal we put out there's like 6 of us who worked on it and thought about it. And so we all sort of feels like, we use so much team time, energy, passion, know-how to do this. But I think we all benefit from, one of the questions we always ask is, thank you for letting us know we didn't get the project, but can you provide any feedback about what we could have done better or your experience with us? And I would say about 50% of the clients are willing to say, yeah, here, let us tell you, it was about price, or it was this other firm has more experience doing this. I mean, it's really important to ask for that feedback and then be able to process it and integrate it. So I'm still working on that.
I have been putting a little bit of a framework around this exact challenge because I struggle with this as well. I was talking to a mentor about 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about, at the end, when this is all over, what is the biggest regret that we're going to have? And he gave it a phenomenal answer, and it inspired me to say, my biggest regret at the end of this entrepreneurial journey is going to be not enjoying the process more along the way. And even enjoying the process of saying, do you guys remember when we spent 23 hours as a team of 6 putting together this proposal, and then they came back and said no, and we were like, what the heck? It's those memories that I think we need to lean into a little bit more as founders and leaders of our organization, because this is a life journey and we might as well enjoy it as we go through the process. But it's so natural to get hung up on the losses. But what if we can look at them as just part of the journey, because they make the victories so much sweeter?
That's right. And again, they make the next one better, right? So I'll be better prepared for that next opportunity.
I want to talk a little bit about work-life harmony versus work-life balance. Now, I said it a little earlier, kind of in a funny way. When we trade in our 9 to 5 for a 24/7, 365, work can become all-consuming. And especially as a founder and a CEO, finding that harmony in life and work can be really tough, really difficult and tough. How have you kind of maybe struggled with this? How have you improved in this? How do you frame it these days, especially with the early inspiration of having more flexibility to spend with your kids, as a mom? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, the irony around that sort of early inspiration, which is, oh, let's go into this business, consulting business, because, I only want to work 30 hours a week, and I, want to be able to spend more time with my kids. It's, what ended up playing out. And again, when you have your own business, you're really on call 24/7. So I never ended up working that 30-hour work week, but I did go to my kids' soccer games and ballet recitals and shows. And so I was happy to trade in. Here's where the harmony comes in, and I still am happy to trade in the the evenings where I have to end up working because I took a couple of hours off during the day. I'm a night person, so I'm happy to be up until midnight if it meant that I could go to my kids' show. And I think that's what the harmony is about. It's never, and that's why we talk about harmony rather than balance. If we're looking for balance, we're going to be looking forever, right? It's not depending on what you do for a living, there just isn't a lot of balance out there. And I think that's especially true for women, but probably everybody. But if we can think about a harmonious life, how do we balance the ability to be able to get out there and take the vacations that we want to take and spend time with family and friends and biking and hiking, which is part of the reason why we moved up to Michigan, is like to really take advantage of the outdoors. And I'm in the work hard, play hard sort of category, is that I'm willing to, work my what off in order to have those opportunities and experiences. And I have said that to every single member of our team who we brought on. Now we're at Evolve, we're around 40 individuals, and we have unlimited PTO, right? We want people to really lean into their personal lives and spend time with friends and family, and that's part of the culture that we're trying to create. However, we have really high expectations around what they're going to deliver on the professional side. So if you can get your work done, you manage your own schedule, right? We're not going to, you want to do a yoga class in the middle of the day, go for it. Good for you. So I am not into micromanaging people. I want to bring people onto my team who have the ability to manage their own time. But I think people need to listen to their bodies, because I think our bodies tell us a lot. So if you're getting headaches or you've got aches and pains, yes, go to a doctor, but so much of our stress manifests itself in our bodies. And I think we have to listen to our bodies and give ourselves a chance to take a break.
Amy, I'm going to risk it here and say that I'm sure there are people from the previous generations of leadership who say, Amy, your team is probably making you look like a sucker. You're giving them unlimited PTO, right? Yes. And you have high expectations. How do you glue both of those crazy worlds together? Is it trust that keeps these things together, or what does it look like?
Well, let's just say this, at the end of the day, whether or not you're getting the products and the deliverables that you need. So I'm in the camp where give people the space to be creative and innovative and flex as they need to. And then if they produce excellent work, stay out of their way, right? Lean into that. So I struggle, again, there's the segment of my team that does executive search, and we've got a lot of members of the nonprofit workforce who are coming out of COVID and really had that flexibility, never thought they wanted to work from home, never yearned for anything like that, and now wouldn't take a job that required them to come in the office 5 days a week. And here I am trying to convince senior executives that they should consider those 2 days of, flex time. And so they're saying the same thing to me, like, how will I know what they're doing? I think if you're a strong manager, you are setting expectations, your team understands the deliverables, they know what you want and need, they show up for team meetings, right? I'm not saying there is no value in face-to-face time. I think there's a lot of value there. But if we can give people, and I think this is especially true about the younger generation in the workforce, if we can give them that flexibility, I think they produce better work. I think, we've always been a remote team, so it wasn't a huge move for us, but I work with dozens of organizations who have come to that place and really understood that, like you said, it's about trust. It's about strong management and expectation setting. And if you can get that and allow people flexibility, you're enabling a very strong work culture, which is what it's about.
I went to the place weirdly in my mind of thinking about your friends in high school. The friends who had over the top, overbearing parents who controlled every minute of their lives were often the wildest, right?
I could not agree more. Yeah.
It was the parents who were like, guys, we trust you, do what you need to do, who had the best kids. And I feel like we need to re-engineer our work lives to be more representative of that trust that we have in our personal lives.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people are yearning for.
The kids who went crazy freshman year of college were all the kids who were not allowed to drink and had those early curfews, right? And they have to experience, I think you're right.
So here's a question for you. Do you ever, and this is kind of like a personal question that I'm asking outward, do you ever struggle to keep the accomplishments that you've accomplished in this long career front of mind instead of the pursuit of the next goal? And I want to share a quote with you from a mentor of mine that I heard. He's on the internet. He's not actually a mentor of mine, but he said, remember, you've already accomplished things that you said would make you happy. What does that kind of mean to you?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I love that question. I think you're right. I think that the pace with which we work right now in this, this environment where everything is like now, next, next, next. I mean, I'm guilty of that too. Like, I just want to check off the boxes, right? I have a list in front of me and I just want to keep getting through it or through my inbox. And the ability to actually take time and think about, like, where am I? Where do I want to be? How far have I come? Right? What's that next frontier look like for me? Not just short term, like what's on my list in the moment, but what is it that I want to do and be? And for me, that happened in June of 2020 when my former business partner and I decided to go our separate ways, and I took 19 members of my former team with me to Evolve Giving Group. We had the opportunity to not just start up the same firm with a different name, but to really think about, okay, who are we and what do we want to be? What are our values? Like, we sat down and had a conversation about values, which was fascinating. What kinds of organizations do we want to serve? What is important to us? What is the change that we want to see in the world? How do we help the world become a better place by supporting the nonprofits who contribute to that world on a daily basis? So I don't do enough of what you just suggested. I wish I did more of it. And thank you for the reminder that I need to do more of that kind of thinking and taking stock. I do think all the time about, back to the you're only as good as your team. I count my blessings and my lucky stars on a daily basis that I am surrounded at Evolve by such talented, passionate, dedicated people. To me, that's something I never take for granted. I don't often sort of think about my own accomplishments that way, but I work with great people, which is really exciting and motivating and energizing on a daily basis.
Ever since my younger sister came back from that business conference I told you about a little earlier, she's had a different perspective on what she wants to create in the business, right? And it's not just about we want to hit this amount of revenue, because we've accomplished that many times and it still feels like we need to get to the next notch.
Yeah.
But what she said was, I would really love for this business to be a vehicle that allows for our employees to be able to experience life at a more fulfilling level. And I had to reflect on that this weekend when I was thinking about, what am I focusing on as a leader? It's empowering my team members to feel like the work that they're doing is fulfilling. It's giving them the flexibility, the unlimited PTO, so they can go to practice and go to all the events and all the family milestones and memories that are so important. And honestly, I now understand why leaders always talk about culture being so important. Being a leader who is basically not a CEO, but a chief constraint officer that can eliminate the constraints of their team to be the best version of themselves. Like, that sense of leadership and power and authority to impact other people's lives is addictive. And I understand why it's so impactful. And it seems like we're kind of both at that stage of being able to be the creator of people's lives by the business and the risk that you took so long ago, which is so powerful.
I agree. And we just went through, we hired a consultant, so putting my money where my mouth is, right? To take us through a growth planning process at year four. Evolve is four. I've been doing this work via Giving Tree and Evolve for, like I said, since 2008. But, we're sort of coming out of our infancy as a company, and thinking about what's next for us. And like you, we have achieved some of our revenue-based goals, our financial goals, but sort of that what's next conversation was difficult for us. And so we brought in someone from the outside who pushed us to understand what growth planning is. So when people said to me, well, how big do you want to be? I didn't even know what they meant. Like, do you mean how many people? Do you mean how much, what our profit is, what our revenue is? I mean, sort of like, what is growth? If not what you just said, if not being able to pay people fairly, right? To be able to afford to take on the kinds of projects that are consistent with our values, be able to do some pro bono work, to be able to offer complimentary coaching and webinars, and to be able to speak for free at conferences. Like, part of our growth allows us the financial stability in order to be able to do those things. So for me, I want to be able to create a growth path for my people that seems exciting. I mean, that's what growth is to me. It's not sure there are some numbers that are tied up in that equation, but I think it's so much more about what do we want for ourselves as a team, the kind of work we want to do, and the environment we want to be able to offer to our team. That's to me what growth is. And that's been our focus as a senior team, contemplating growth.
It kind of takes me back to the place of playing sports, right? I always think that a championship in whatever sport we're talking about is a byproduct of creating the team and creating the culture that gels together, that then out of their ability to work together creates the results down the road. And I think that that's just a beautiful place for us to put a little bit of a bow on today's episode. Amy, part of our tradition that we have here on the podcast is our previous guest wants to ask you a blind question.
Okay.
Now, our previous guest is the CEO of an amazing organization called Lemonade Day. They're a social entrepreneurship group that helps young kids experience entrepreneurship through starting lemonade stands across the country. That. It's beautiful. Part of our conversation was very similar to what we had here today. She was saying, the line between personal and professional life is becoming very blurry for a lot of CEOs and founders. So your next guest, I'd like to know, what is your personal life, or what is it about your personal life that is even more present in your professional life these days?
That's a great question. I think because so much of the work that we do focuses on equity, social justice, again, making the world a better place. I think harder about how I do that, not just on the professional side, but what am I doing with my volunteer time? So I think because of the work I do, I contemplate in a different way how I spend my volunteer hours. And I don't actually feel complete as a human if that aspect of my life is not active, right? So what am I doing to contribute to my community? So whether it's right now, last night my husband and I were making phone calls encouraging people to vote in the upcoming campaign. What that looks like different things at different times. It might be volunteering at a food pantry or a shelter in town for us. So for me, I just feel a little bit more intentional about exploring that aspect of who I am, because I think it rounds us all out as people if we can step away from ourselves, our own needs, our children's needs, and think about the communities that we live in.
I love that. Well, Amy, it's easy to say for everybody who's been watching and tuning or listening and watching here today, you are the definition of heart and hustle. And we can't thank you enough for taking risk and creating an organization and uplifting your team and creating a future where people can be their best version of themselves. Seriously, thank you so much for joining us on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
And that's a wrap, guys. We'll catch you in the next one.